The wedding dress clung to Eleanor Hayes' slender frame, the delicate lace feeling both suffocating and inescapable, like chains disguised as silk. Each step forward was not a march toward love, but toward surrender. She had once dreamed of a wedding, but not like this. Not as a transaction, not as a sentence with no appeal. Eleanor had once known peace. She grew up in a small cottage on the outskirts of London, where the afternoons were filled with birdsong in the garden and the warm, comforting scent of freshly baked bread wafting from her mother's kitchen. She remembered the way her mother would smile, flour dusting her hands as she guided Eleanor through kneading dough. But all of that disappeared the day her mother died. Her father, Arthur Hayes, had once been an ambitious businessman, but luck had never been on his side. Failed investments, miscalculated risks, and relentless creditors had pushed their family into a chasm of debt. The man who had once been strong and proud was now frail and defeated, weighed down by desperation. And when Sebastian Cole, the CEO of Cole KQ, a multi-billion-pound financial empire, offered to erase those debts in exchange for Eleanor's hand in marriage, Arthur had no choice but to accept. And so she found herself here, standing in the grand halls of St. Vincent's Cathedral, surrounded by London's elite, their eyes filled with curiosity, judgment, and disdain. The towering stone walls and high-arched ceilings loomed above her, as if she were being sealed inside a tomb. "Another one of the Cole family's business arrangements," someone whispered. "Look at her, wrapped up like a product ready for delivery." At the end of the aisle, Sebastian Cole stood tall, unmoving. Impeccable in his tailored black suit, his features were sharp, controlled, an unshakable force of power. But his dark eyes did not meet hers. To him, this was nothing more than a deal to be finalized. The priest's voice resonated through the grand cathedral. "Sebastian Cole, do you take Eleanor Hayes to be your lawfully wedded wife, to love and cherish in wealth or poverty, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" A long silence stretched. Eleanor held her breath. A flicker of desperate hope surfaced. Maybe he would refuse. Maybe he would walk away and leave her free. But then his deep, unwavering voice shattered that illusion. "I do." 2 words. Cold, final, like the slamming of a steel door. The priest turned to Eleanor, sympathy hidden in his aged eyes. "Eleanor Hayes, do you take Sebastian Cole as your husband?" Her gaze drifted to her father. Arthur sat hunched in the front row, his hands clenched, shoulders trembling. If she refused, he would lose everything. He might even go to prison. Her throat tightened, but there was no choice. "I do." Sebastian slid the ring onto her finger, the touch impersonal, mechanical. "You may now kiss the bride." Sebastian leaned in, his lips barely brushing her cheek. Distant, indifferent, simply fulfilling the ritual. Scattered applause filled the church, hollow and rehearsed, like the end of a play everyone already knew the script to. Eleanor gripped her bouquet tighter, willing her hands not to shake. Sebastian strode out first, never once looking back. Eleanor followed, stepping into the waiting black Bentley, knowing that from this moment on, her life would no longer be her own. The Bentley's door shut with a sharp finality, sealing Eleanor Hayes inside a silence she didn't know how to break. Her fingers curled around the fabric of her wedding dress, holding onto it as if it were the only thing grounding her. Beside her, Sebastian Cole remained a statue, still, unreadable, detached. The car glided through the illuminated streets of London, but the city outside blurred into nothing more than streaks of light. She barely noticed when the car pulled up before a towering skyscraper, Sebastian's estate. She followed him inside, through a grand marble lobby where crystal chandeliers sparkled like distant stars. Opulent, breathtaking, yet void of warmth. Sebastian said nothing. Instead, he turned to the butler, a stern-looking man whose expression remained impassive. "Take her to her room." His voice was deep, firm, dismissive, like he was speaking of a guest, not his wife. Eleanor followed the butler down a long corridor. Every door they passed was shut, sealing away whatever lay behind them. When they reached a room, the butler pushed open the door, revealing a grand yet lifeless space. A vast bed dressed in pristine white sheets, an empty wardrobe, a window that overlooked London's sleeping skyline. "Master Cole wishes for you to rest here." the butler stated before leaving her alone. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of the night press down on her. She was his wife, yet from the moment she stepped inside this house, she had been pushed aside like an outsider. She had no idea how long she sat there before the door suddenly creaked open. Sebastian. He stood there, his tie gone, the top buttons of his shirt undone, revealing the sharp contours of his chest. But what made Eleanor's breath hitch wasn't his appearance, it was his eyes. There was something in them, something strange, as if he was battling a war within himself. He moved toward her slowly, gaze locked onto hers. Eleanor wanted to speak, to ask what he was thinking, but before she could form the words, he reached for her, pulling her close, his lips crashing against hers. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't hesitant, it was fierce, commanding, like he was staking a claim. For a moment, Eleanor froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. Fear curled inside her, but then, something else. There was a contradiction in the way he touched her. His grip on her waist was firm, but not punishing. His kiss, though forceful, had a flicker of restraint, like he was fighting himself even as he took control. And then he kissed her again, harder, deeper. Passion, possession, and something neither of them could name burned between them. Eleanor's heart still held fear, but her body reacted instinctively, drawn into the storm of him. That night, she realized something. This marriage was more than a contract. There was something else between them, something even Sebastian couldn't control. The days following the wedding, Eleanor began to notice that Sebastian Cole wasn't entirely the ice-cold wall she had thought he was. He didn't shower her with sweet words. He didn't offer her the tenderness one would expect between husband and wife. But in small, fleeting moments, she caught glimpses of something, cracks in the armor he wore so effortlessly. One morning, Eleanor woke up in her vast, empty room and noticed something resting on the wooden bedside table. A book, Jane Eyre. Her fingers brushed over its aged pages, the familiar scent of paper filling her senses. In the corner of the first page, a short note was scribbled in handwriting she instantly recognized. "For you, Sebastian." She froze. She had mentioned this book once in passing during their first night together. A simple remark about how she admired stories of love and resilience, of women who fought against the world. She never thought he had been listening. Yet here it was. She wanted to ask him about it, but when she saw Sebastian that morning over breakfast, he simply shrugged. "It's nothing." His voice was indifferent as he sipped his coffee, as if the gesture meant little. But to Eleanor, it meant everything. And then the small changes continued. One morning, she stepped into the kitchen and was immediately met with the smell of something. Burnt? She turned the corner and nearly stopped in disbelief. Sebastian stood at the stove, his sleeves rolled up, a pan in his hand. On the counter sat 2 very burnt pieces of toast and an overcooked egg. He glanced at her, then exhaled. "I'm not good at this," he muttered, setting the pan down, and yet he still pushed the plate toward her, as if waiting for her reaction. Eleanor hesitated, then picked up a piece of the burnt toast and took a small bite. The bitterness spread across her tongue, but still, she smiled. "Not bad," she lied. And for the first time, the very first time, she saw the faintest twitch of a smirk at the corner of his lips. It kept happening, little by little, like slow drops of water eroding the cold distance between them. One evening, when Eleanor attended a high society gala, she overheard whispers behind her back, mocking murmurs from the women of London's elite. She expected Sebastian to ignore it. Instead, he reached for her hand. His grip was firm, protective, as he turned to the group, his gaze sharp. "She is my wife." His voice was low, commanding, "and I won't hear another word about it." Eleanor stared down at their intertwined hands. Warm, unwavering. For the first time, she found herself wondering, did Sebastian care for her? Even just a little? Happiness, if it had ever existed, was nothing more than a fleeting illusion, slipping through Eleanor's fingers like smoke. She had grown used to the small changes in Sebastian Cole, the quiet, unspoken ways he showed he cared. Sometimes she even allowed herself to believe that maybe they could build something real between them. But all of those fragile hopes shattered in a single day. That morning, Eleanor woke to an eerie silence. When she stepped into the living room, she found Sebastian standing by the window, his face carved in stone. Opposite him stood Vincent Holloway, a man with sharp eyes and an even sharper smile. "I warned you, Sebastian," Vincent smirked. "No one stays on top forever. I simply made sure you fell faster." Sebastian didn't react. His silver eyes remained locked onto Vincent. But Eleanor could see the tension in his clenched fists. "Get out of my house." Sebastian's voice was razor sharp. Vincent chuckled. "It won't be your house for much longer." And he wasn't lying. Within an hour, the news spread like wildfire. Cole Q under investigation for financial fraud. The company's stock crashed. Investors fled. The headlines screamed, "Sebastian Cole, financial genius or master manipulator." The fall of an empire. Cole Q engulfed in scandal. Eleanor watched Sebastian fight until exhaustion consumed him. He worked day and night, but the tide only turned against him faster. Then the police came. Sebastian was arrested inside his own home. Eleanor stood frozen as they placed handcuffs around his wrists, dragging him away before she could even breathe. "Eleanor, believe me." His voice was low, urgent. But she could do nothing. Days later, everything was gone. His wealth, his empire. Their home. With no other choice, Eleanor packed what little she had left and returned to her father's house. The small cottage on the outskirts of London hadn't changed, but her father had. Arthur Hayes was no longer the strong, ambitious man she remembered. Years of financial struggles had left him frail and weary. He could no longer work, his hands too weak to hold a pen, his once sharp mind dulled by age and stress. Now, it was Eleanor's turn to take care of him. She found work at a small grocery store nearby, spending her days stocking shelves and handling customers, her feet aching from standing too long. But she endured it, because she had no choice. And then, on a cold winter afternoon, she gave birth. A baby boy with Sebastian's blue-gray eyes, his tiny fingers curling around hers as if he already knew how much she had suffered. She named him Gilbert. Holding him close in the dim light of her father's worn-down home, she whispered a quiet promise. "We will wait for your father to come back." No matter how long it took. Time moved slowly. Each day, Eleanor woke before sunrise, working long hours at the grocery store. Her hands were rough, her body exhausted, but she had no time to dwell on it. She had to care for Gilbert, look after her aging father, and, most of all, keep waiting. Gilbert grew up in that tiny, worn-down house, learning to take his first steps on creaking wooden floors and listening to bedtime stories about a man he had never met. "Your father is a strong man," Eleanor whispered each night, staring out at the London sky. "One day, he will come back to us." She had repeated those words so many times, until, one day, they became true. That morning, as Eleanor worked behind the counter, a shadow appeared in the doorway. She looked up, and her heart nearly stopped. Sebastian. He stood there, thinner than before, his hair longer, his clothes far simpler than the impeccably tailored suits she once knew. But his eyes, those familiar stormy gray eyes, were just the same. Her breath caught in her throat. Sebastian stepped forward, placing a hand on the wooden counter. His voice was hoarse but steady. "I came back." Eleanor swallowed hard, emotions choking her. "You were gone too long." Sebastian nodded, guilt flickering across his face. "I know, but I never forgot you." She inhaled shakily, then whispered, "There's someone who's been waiting for you." She turned to the back of the store. Gilbert. The 2-year-old sat on the floor, playing with his wooden blocks. As Eleanor lifted him into her arms, he blinked up at her, then turned toward the unfamiliar man before him. Eleanor knelt. "Gilbert, this is your father." The whole world seemed to fall silent. Gilbert blinked at Sebastian, as if trying to memorize his face. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then, without hesitation, He reached out his tiny hands toward him. Sebastian's hands trembled as he took his son into his arms. He held Gilbert close, feeling the warmth of his tiny body, the heartbeat against his own. "I'm here now, son." His voice broke. Eleanor watched them, a lump forming in her throat. She had waited so long for this moment, had dreamed of it, but now that it was real, she could hardly believe it. That night, as they sat together in Eleanor's small home, Sebastian looked at her and said, "Let's leave London. Let's start over." Eleanor hesitated for a moment, then turned to her father. Arthur Hayes was sitting in his worn-out chair, cradling Gilbert, who had dozed off in his arms. Arthur had aged so much over the years. His once strong hands now trembled slightly, his shoulders slumped with the weight of time. But despite his frailty, there was peace in his expression as he held his grandson. Eleanor knew London had never been a kind place to them. "Not just the three of us," she said softly. "We'll all go together." Sebastian looked at Arthur, then back at Eleanor. A moment passed before he nodded. "We'll be a real family." A few weeks later, they left London behind. They moved to a quiet countryside town where no one knew Sebastian Cole as the disgraced billionaire, and no one looked at Eleanor Hayes as the contract bride. Together, they opened a small cafe on a peaceful street corner. Every morning, Sebastian, once a man who controlled financial empires, stood behind the counter, clumsily learning how to make coffee. Eleanor arranged pastries in the glass display case, greeting customers with a warm smile. And Arthur, sitting by the window, watched over Gilbert as he played, laughing and running around the shop. Whenever Eleanor glanced at her father, she saw something she hadn't seen in years: contentment. Arthur wasn't the same strong businessman he once was, but he had a new role now: a grandfather. He spent his days reading stories to Gilbert, teaching him how to plant flowers in the little garden behind the cafe, and holding his tiny hand during their afternoon walks. For the first time in a long time, Eleanor felt like she had a home. One evening, as the sun cast golden light over the town, Eleanor and Sebastian sat on the porch of their modest house, watching Gilbert chase fireflies in the yard. Sebastian took Eleanor's hand, intertwining their fingers. "We lost everything," Eleanor murmured, "but in the end, we found what truly mattered." Sebastian looked at her, his gaze warm, no longer weighed down by the past. "We have each other." And that was all they needed.